Hi, I just wanted to illustrate the differences between the two types of abstracts that I mentioned above and sort of show you how either type can be helpful when you're writing a paper. So what I have up here right now is from a library database. I'm going to show you in a later video how to access those databases because that's really the best place to look for articles when you're doing research. But I was taking that sample topic that I discussed in a previous video about the issue of removing Confederate symbols. So let's say I'm doing some research on that particular topic and I find an article that sounds like it might be relevant. So the title of this article is Regional Media Framing of the Confederate Flag Debate in South Carolina. So again, if I were writing on these Confederate symbols, maybe an interesting perspective would be like how the media discusses that issue, how different media sources discuss it differently. So you'll notice here that this article, it comes from this journal called Newspaper Research Journal. And if you look here, it tells you that it's a 22-page long article. One of the best benefits of an abstract, and this one is an example of an informational abstract, so this is the kind that is written after the paper is already done, is that those types of abstracts usually are written specifically for people doing research to give them a general overview of what the full article is going to be about. So this is great for you as a researcher because this prevents you from having to read through a full article to figure out what it's about. This can end up saving you a lot of time. Like I talked about above, an abstract is going to be a condensed summary of what the full essay is about. So if you read that abstract, it should give you a good sense of whether it's worth reading the full article or not, and it can really save you a lot of time. So just something to mention, and again, I might mention this again in a later video, but when you find an article and you're trying to decide like whether it's worthwhile or not, there are things that you can look at to kind of give you a better sense of whether it's going to be worth your time or not. So one is I would always look at where it lists the subject terms. Sometimes that will give you more information than looking at the article title itself. I mean, I think this title is pretty clear, but sometimes they can be a little bit misleading. So this one tells me that this article is about Confederate flags, content analysis. It specifically mentions the Charleston church shooting that happened, and how newspapers report on this stuff, right? So just looking at that information can sometimes give you sort of important data about whether you should be looking at this article in depth or not. But if you scroll down, you can see we have this short abstract here. And, like I talked about above, a good abstract is usually between like 100, maybe 200 words. So this little paragraph gives more specifics about what the article is about. So it says, it's content analysis of 400 news stories in 3 South Carolina newspapers. It examines the frames used about the Confederate flag debate in the first 25 days after the 2015 Charleston church massacre. So again, just by reading this, I should be able to decide, yes, this sounds like a good, useful article that might work in my paper, or no, this isn't worth looking at, right? So again, these informational abstracts, they're really there to help you as researchers, right? So that's something to think about once you actually get into the research process. I also wanted to show you an example of more of the other type of abstract, the one that you guys are going to be writing, which is a proposal abstract. And again, the big difference between informational and proposal is that the proposal abstract is going to be written before you actually write the paper, before you know exactly where it's going to go, which sometimes can be a little bit harder. And it's fine if the paper doesn't end up matching what you thought it would in the proposal. Really, the idea is that you're proposing that something is a worthwhile topic to investigate, and you're trying to prove that by explaining what you really want to look at in that paper. So again, I wanted to give you an example of what this might look like. You have a couple examples in your textbook, but again, using the example that I kind of mentioned in the other video about Confederate symbols, I thought I'd show you how I might write one, a proposal abstract, if I were writing on that topic. So I'll pull up two documents here. The first one, this is the same document that we were looking at in the previous video, where I'm just generating ideas, doing some preliminary research, that sort of thing, right? The purpose of doing this, like doing that step of generating ideas, is that it should make the writing of your abstract really easy. Because once you've gotten all these ideas out, then you just need to kind of rearrange them, maybe do a little bit more explaining, and ultimately you have your abstract. So again, I just want to show you this abstract that I created. It's just straight from these notes that I took when I was generating ideas. So let's look at my abstract. You know, I put a proposed title here, like what I think I might call the paper, but maybe that'll end up changing if I were to actually write the full paper, right? So sometimes just giving that title or what you're thinking about calling it might give the audience a better sense of where you're going to head with this paper. So I proposed calling this Competing Freedoms, the Debate Over Removal of Confederate Symbols. Again, maybe that's not great. Maybe I'll come up with something different later on, but that's kind of my placeholder title right now. So here's my proposal abstract. And again, what you're going to see is I'll kind of talk about the current situation. I'll talk about some of the issues within this kind of movement of removing the Confederate symbols. And I'll talk about like questions I want to try to answer in my research. This abstract, looking at my page counter, ended up being about 238 words, which is a little bit long. But again, yours should probably be around this length, maybe a little bit shorter, right? So I said, in the past, there have been movements to eliminate Confederate symbols, such as the Confederate flag and monuments of Confederate generals and soldiers, but perhaps none as vigorous as that which we are seeing today in response to the murder of George Floyd. The act of removing these symbols have proven controversial because people seem to disagree on what these symbols represent. Some think they're racist, while others think they're a significant aspect of Southern heritage. So again, I'm just setting the scene here in the first couple of sentences, right? Here's what's going on. Here are the different positions on this issue, whatever. So then I'm going to start talking about what I want to find out from my research. In my report, I'd like to investigate why people view these symbols and the events they represent, such as the Civil War, so differently. I'll research why these symbols were created in the first place. Additionally, I will examine what prior events have prompted the push to remove these symbols. Finally, I'd like to find data on how many monuments have already been removed versus how many still exist today. There are many issues about which people debate when it comes to the removal of these Confederate symbols, such as when the Civil War really ended, why the conflict actually occurred, and what the purpose of the symbols actually is. So again, I'm bringing up some of these issues, and the idea is that when later I go to write the paper, this will give me reminders about stuff that I want to talk about. So like maybe each of these kind of issues or sentences that I put in here, maybe that's going to end up being a particular paragraph of my paper. So theoretically, this abstract can help you figure out the organization when you get to the drafting stage of the paper. And the thing is, once I actually go do the research, maybe I won't end up actually discussing all the things in my paper that I talked about here. That's fine. You're not like making some promise that you are absolutely going to talk about everything in this abstract. It's just, here's what I'm thinking it's going to look like right now, but it might end up being slightly or very different, right? This is kind of just to get you going. So then I ended mine by mentioning what I think my thesis is going to be. Like we talked about before, the thesis may or probably will change after you've actually done the research and see if these ideas that you have about the topic, whether your research supports that stuff, right? But if you remember in the previous video, my thought was it seems like a lot of the controversy surrounding these removals of symbols is that people have different ideas about what freedom means, right? So I put something about that as my proposed thesis. I said, my proposed thesis is that the debate about Confederate symbols is really a debate over what freedom actually means. Freedom to live without reminders of racial discrimination, or freedom of expression without censorship through government intervention. Again, those seem to be kind of at the heart of this issue. Like people are defining freedom differently, and they're arguing that one of these freedoms is more important than the other, right? So again, just wanted to show you how your own proposal abstract might look. But again, I think that either one of these abstracts that you encounter in your classes for college, theoretically, either one can really help you with the writing of that assignment. Okay, thanks. Bye.